Okay, I've put my USB stick into the drive and I've booted the system and gotten it to the boot menu. So different systems use different keys to do this. Sometimes it's F12, sometimes it's F11, sometimes it's F9, sometimes it's delete, sometimes it's escape. It just depends on your system, so you'll have to kind of find out what that is based on your system. But once you get here, you'll see that there's options to boot from different drives. In this case, I want to boot from my SanDisk flash drive, and there's two options. There's SanDisk UEFI and then SanDisk. I want to boot from just SanDisk because I have mine set up for BIOS. If you're using UEFI, feel free to use that option instead. So I'm going to move down to SanDisk. I'm just going to hit enter once it's highlighted, and then the system will start to boot, and it'll run through a quick boot process, and then it'll give us another menu. Once you get here, you'll see that you have several options. So I just hit the down arrow to stop the countdown. If you don't stop the countdown, the system will actually start going through and just booting on number 1 automatically. But you see you have the option to install and upgrade. You have some options for reboot. You have an option, you have option to do the install through a serial console if you have that set up. And so a few other things. Really all I just want to do is number 1, so I'm just going to hit 1 on the keyboard here to start that process. Once it goes through this, it'll come up with another menu for us, or a few items for us to actually go through the installation process. So I'm going to run this through like it's new. So if you see here, there's a few different options that we've got. And in this case, we want to do install and upgrade. So we're just going to leave it highlighted on that top one and hit enter for OK. Now here it asks, okay, what are you trying to accomplish? So you need to select which drive you want to install this on. So be very careful. Pay attention to the size of the drives and what they're called, and make sure you install it on the drive you intend. They suggest that you don't use a flash drive for this anymore. You should really install it on an internal drive. So I've got an SSD. It's a small drive here that I'm going to use. And in order to select that thing, you just highlight it, press the space bar. That puts a little asterisk next to it, and now you can hit enter to select OK. Once you come to this screen, it's going to say, okay, what do you want to do? Do you want to do an upgrade? So this is asking, do I want to upgrade the TrueNAS install that's here now? Which I don't. In this case, we're going to do a fresh install, so I'm going to select this one. If you don't already have a TrueNAS install, it's not going to matter which one you select because it can't upgrade anything. But in this case, I'm going to select this one. I'm going to hit enter. So on this one, it's saying, do I want to use a new boot volume or do I want to overwrite everything? So in my case, I'm going to go ahead and overwrite everything and start fresh. And then here it gives us a couple of warnings about you're about to delete all the data that's on this drive. Be careful before you do this. Make sure you've got it backed up if you want it. And then it tells you again, don't use a flash drive. We don't suggest that. You should really use an SSD or a hard drive. So I'm going to hit that I want to do this. And here it's going to ask me for my password. So I'm going to type in my password that I want for the system. And we're going to do this one more time after we tab, the same thing. You have to make sure that the passwords match, but once you've got them both typed in, just hit tab to get to the OK and then press enter. So here it's going to ask, how do you want to boot this? Do you want to boot it in UEFI or do you want to boot it in BIOS mode? And in my case, I want to boot in BIOS mode, so I'm just going to keep the default here and hit enter. And then it's asking if I want to create swap. It doesn't bother me to create swap. It's not that much space in this case, so it's fine. But if you're using a really small drive, you may not want to do this. I'm just going to hit enter. And it's going to go through the process for installing TrueNAS. Once everything's installed, we can move over to the web interface. But I'll kind of show you what happens as it goes through the installation process here. So went through and formatted the drive. Now it's going to start actually doing the install, and you'll see it does kind of a counter across the bottom of the screen there. It's nothing super exciting. It just kind of counts off how much it's done so far as it goes along. Once it finishes, it'll tell you that the TrueNAS installation succeeded and that you can now reboot the system and remove the flash media that we used in order to do everything. So I'm just going to hit OK. It's going to come back to this menu, and in this case we're going to move down. So in this case I'm going to move down. I'm going to say shut down the system, then I'll remove my media and I'll reboot it. So I'm just going to hit OK, and it's going to go through a quick shutdown process. So I'm filming this in a few different pieces and I'll put it all together at the end, but I've got a system set up that I set up earlier, and I just kind of wanted to go through some of the settings for TrueNAS. So I think it's really important that you get things set up correctly on these systems. As you guys know, I go through settings quite a bit. Don't always go through every setting, but I try to go through some that are pretty important. So when you first install TrueNAS, this is really what you see. Now this dashboard grows as you start adding disks and pools and storage spaces and things like that. But out of the gate, you can kind of see what version you're on. You can see the CPU percentage that it's using. So right now I'm using just nothing. It's just sitting there. It doesn't have anything. I haven't set up any storage or anything yet, so there's really nothing for it to do. And then over here you can see your RAM. So this machine has 16 gigs. I've got 4 cores. It's a Ryzen machine of some kind. I don't remember what it is. I built it last spring, just to be kind of a gaming rig, but I don't game that much. So I thought, you know what, I can put this to better use. And then you've got another thing down here for your links, for your network links, so you can see what's going on with your network as well. So when you kind of first set it up, you log in as root. You don't have any other users. Everything gets set up as root, and you set up your passwords during the setup phase, which is really through a screen text-based thing. That's the only time you actually need a screen set up on the machine. Once you've done that, you can disconnect the screen and really run it headless, and then you just log in through the web browser like I am here. So over here underneath the little icon for your person, you've got, of course, logout, and then you can restart the server from here, and you can shut down the server from here if you need to shut it down and do something to it and then bring it back up. So it's nice to have those features here in the UI for something that's running remotely. In this case, tonight I'm recording here in my room, and I'm on my iMac, so I've got the screen kind of set to be 1920 by 1080. But this machine's out in my office, so it's not even in the physical same building as me right now. When we go over and look at settings, you'll see here you get several choices. So you'll see you get change password, so you can change your password if you need to. You get preferences, you get API keys if you need to set up API keys to write to the API for TrueNAS itself, and then of course about, where you can see a little bit more information about TrueNAS. So we're going to go into the preferences section. Now this is a nice web UI. It generally runs pretty fast. It's pretty snappy. Now it's of course going to depend on the hardware you're trying to run it on. I will say out of the gate, TrueNAS, as far as I know, does not run on a Raspberry Pi. So if you're looking to run something on a Pi, I'm going to do something on Open Media Vault later, which will run on a Pi, and probably a Pi 4 would be your optimal option there, with some external hard drives connected via USB. TrueNAS definitely has some issues with USB from what I've seen so far. But so have a lot of the systems that I've looked at. I've also used Rockstore for a while, and I'll do a video on Rockstore at some point for those that are interested in that one. It's Linux based and uses Docker for doing the plugins and things like that, so it was definitely interesting. I had a couple of little weird issues with it, but it has an active community, which is great. You can go ask questions and stuff like that. So I'll go through all that when I do that one as well. For now, we're going to tackle TrueNAS. And really it's BSD based, so it's a Unix based system, which is pretty cool. But they are working on a new version called TrueNAS Scale, which is going to be based on Linux. And that one will have Kubernetes support, whereas this one has a plugin system that's through a different kind of setup and uses jails and things like that are built into BSD. So when you get into your preferences right out of the gate here, you've kind of got your theme page. So you can go down through here and just kind of check out what themes they have, and you can click and then apply it and see if you want to see a different theme. I'm okay with the dark theme, but if you do this, now if you have your screen set bright and it's middle of the night, I apologize. This is pretty bright, but I'm about to switch it back to the dark theme. But you can see that there's some different kinds of themes. So here's the one called Dracula. There's a few down here, standard dark. If you switch it over to that, it's more of a bluish, greenish looking theme to me. I kind of like the original, the IX Dark, which is perfectly fine. It's got a nice theme. It's pretty dark. It doesn't hurt my eyes so much. And then you've got some options down here that you can check as well. So kind of go through and check the things that you need for your system. So that's really kind of the preferences section of the settings, but there's also some other settings here that you need to go through. So when you come in, again, we start at the dashboard, but here on the left you've got your navigation. Now you can hide navigation and you can show navigation with the little hamburger menu here. And then right below the dashboard you have a couple of other sections. So first thing is accounts, so you can go and set up user accounts. And we'll get to this. I'm going to do this as a series, so I'll get to the part about setting up user accounts. But you use those user accounts really not so much for accessing TrueNAS, but for giving access to storage within TrueNAS that you have set up for various things. So you may be setting up storage where somebody has a Samba share that they can use for a backup, or some other kind of share that they can use for a backup, and that person needs to have access to that storage space, and really you should be setting up separate users for that access. You can also set up groups of users, so you can set up not only the users for sharing those access spaces, but you can also set up groups and assign storage spaces to groups where multiple people have access to those storage spaces as well. As we move on down, we're going to go into System, and this is really where we're going to get into the bulk of our settings now. So out of the gate on General, you're going to see a few different things here that are important for you just to look at least and check and make sure they look accurate. So first thing I'm going to do is going to make the UI a little bit larger because it is kind of small even for me. I'm sure it's not great if you're looking at this on a phone. But out of the gate, you're going to have the GUI here, and basically it says, GUI SSL certificate. So right now I'm using the FreeNAS default. I'm not even logging in through SSL. I'm just logging in straight up through HTTP on my local network. But if you want to secure this, it's going to have a self-signed certificate out of the gate. And then if you want to set it up with like Nginx Proxy Manager later for having a domain name and a Let's Encrypt certificate, you can do that. But I would say this is something you should really run on your internal network and not be messing around with having it out on the internet. That's just me and my personal preference. And there's some other security things you can set up as well to really kind of guard against anybody trying to get to your data. So the web IPv4 web interface says 0000, but that's actually not correct. It's just saying that you can get to it from anywhere, I believe, instead of actually saying this is the interface that you need to come from. You have IPv6. Now this does run on port 80 on this machine and then port 443. So you need to understand that those two ports are already in use. It's using TLS version 1.2 or version 1.3, and then you can click this to say, nope, I don't want 1.2, I only want 1.3, and that way you can kind of set up the TLS version that you want. I think these are fine for now, but if you want to turn off .2, you can. So you can also select to say, I want it to redirect HTTP to HTTPS all the time, so if you check this box and save that setting, then whenever you come back in, it's going to redirect you. Localization is always important, so if English is not your primary language, you have some other options here. So you can go through and see if there's one here that fits you better, and you can try to pick the language that you prefer. The console keyboard map kind of gives you an idea of what works with the console keyboard. Again, you want to set this to wherever you're from so that it matches what you're trying to do. You can set up your date format here, and you can kind of pick what format you prefer. The one that it has set right now is fine by me, but if you prefer a different date format because it makes better sense, then feel free to pick that. Your time zone is important, so I am not in the Los Angeles time zone, so this is not currently correct. As I said, I just reset up this system, so it's important for you to go out and set the correct time zone, and you'll see there's Africa. I am in America, so you'll want to scroll down to where you're at, and I am in America, and it's usually Chicago. Let's see, yeah, right here, and that sets me to Central Time, which is the correct time for me, and this is the incorrect time. This is 2 hours behind right now, but once I save my changes, it should all go through. And then you can say, yes, I want to do crash reporting, and yes, I want to do usage statistics, and this is supposed to be anonymous stuff, so you can click on the little question marks to get a little more information about what these settings mean. When you're done, you can say save, and you'll notice that it changed the time after it finished saving because it's now got the correct time zone set. So that's your general session. We can go here to NTP servers, so we can look at the different NTP servers, and if you have a preferred NTP server that you want to use, so this is just your time protocol servers that basically set your time, you can add those, you can take these away, you can change them, whatever you want to do. I don't really mess with these. They seem to work just fine, so I don't mess with them. So then you get into the advanced settings, and there's a few advanced settings here that are just worth noting. I don't really mess with these. I just kind of leave them as they are, but you can go in and kind of tune things up if you want to, and if you kind of know what you're doing, it might be worthwhile. If you're just learning how to do this, I'd say leave them where they are for the defaults, but worth pointing out. So first of all is show the text console. So this is talking about when you have an actual screen connected to your machine. That it's going to show the screen console without a password prompt. So sometimes there's messages there that can be useful if something weird's going on, and you may need to hook up a screen. And this is just saying, if you do you want it to prompt you for a username and password, or do you just want it to show you what's in the console? So if it's checked, it'll show you what's in the console. If you want to have a serial console set up, you can, and then you can check that box. I don't, so I don't mess with it. Storage, it has swap space set at 2 gigabytes. That's fine. I'm not going to mess with it. I've got plenty of RAM. For the GUI, again, you can say show the console messages in the GUI. I don't want to do that. And then show advanced fields by default. I don't really want to do that either, so I'm not going to tell it to do that right now. And then you can set up self-encrypting drive information if you want to. Again, I'm not changing any of the defaults here. Then you've got some kernel information and system log information that you can set up. Again, I'm not making any changes here. I just wanted you guys to know about what's in the advanced settings section. The important one here to me is email. So you want to set up your email, and you want to set up the SMTP portion of your email so that whenever things are happening with this server, it can tell you. If you have a drive that might be going bad, if a drive just unmounted itself all of a sudden for no reason, you know, if anything weird is happening, the server can send you an email and tell you that. It's got a notification system, but you need to be looking at this particular console to see that. So having an email come in to let you know that something weird's going on is always valuable. So if you want to set this up, then you come in and you actually put in the correct email information. And the from field usually is just going to be your email as well. So for me, it would be this. And then you're going to go down here, and I'm going to say that this is SMTP email. So I'm going to set it all up. And here's the from name, so you can put yourself in here. You can also just put TrueNAS home, whatever you want, right? And then outgoing mail server, so you need to put in your mail server address and information. In my case, this is mine. Mine is port 587. And then I have plain, which is correct, and I have, let's see, so we need start TLS in this case for me. And then my username is brian@fixitdelrio.com. And my password is stored, let's see, yeah, it's just going to do dots. So I've got my password stored in Bitwarden. Let me go grab that. So now I'm just going to paste in my password here, and then we will save. And it says that it's saved. I'm not going to save that for now, and I'm going to send a test email. So it's going to pop up and say you need to configure the root user email address. So we can close this and we'll go do that. So we're in email. We're going to go back up here to accounts, and we're going to go to users, and you'll see that the only user in here is root. So it's just telling you that there are built-in users except root, and those users are hidden. So root is the only one that it shows you that are built-in users. Here we can click the little down arrow to see a little bit more detail about root, and then we'll click on edit. So right here it says, you know, username root, full name root, and then you have the space for email. So we can go in and say this is the email I want for root because that's who it's going to send it to. And then we can just go down here to the bottom and save. And now we can go back into system and then email, and we can say send a test email. So you'll see it pops up and it says the email was sent, and I should be able to go to my email. So let me go log into that. And here you can see that I received the email message that I just sent. The test message went through without an issue. So we're doing well. So email is set up, which is great. That's the main thing that we really wanted to get. So here you can set up a few reporting options. You can say report CPU usage in percentage. If you want to use Graphite, you can say use separate Graphite instances, and then you can set up Graphite host names. I don't, so there's again nothing for me to change here, but something for you to be aware of. So there are different alert services that you can have here. So we have email. There's also SNMP. If you want to use simple network message protocol, you can do that as well if you have something to trap those messages and do something with them. So you have a few other options here as well if you want to see some other types of messaging. So there's AWS SNS, so simple network service. I don't remember what that stands for. There's InfluxDB, there's Mattermost, there's OpsGenie, there's PagerDuty, there's Slack. Then of course you have SNMP, and finally you have VictorOps. So you have a few different options there for messaging if you want to set up other messaging types in the system as well. Again, nothing for me to set up, but something for you to be aware of, that there are other options if you want to use them. Now you have a lot of alert settings that you can go through and set up. I don't really want to go through all of these things, but it's something worthwhile for you to go through and kind of check out and make sure that you have the right alert settings set up for your system. And depending on what you're doing with your system will depend on what you want to have set up for different alert types and alerts. But it's worthwhile to go through here. And again, if you want to understand something more, click on the little check or on the little question mark, and it'll give you a brief overview of what you're going to see there. So once you click on one of these, then you can also just click on the little X to close it back down. But they've got information on each one of these settings so you can understand what they do and what they're for and why you might want to use it. So one of the things about it is you can see that it has different levels, so critical or warning, things like that. So if you see something and you're like, boy, I'd really rather know about that faster, you can change warning on this to be instead critical. You can make it an informational notice, you can make it just a notice. It just depends on what you think that should be. So you can go through and kind of see these different alert types and settings and change those things to suit what you need. So the cloud credentials section, I haven't really done anything on the cloud credentials part yet. I'll probably do that in another part of the series. I'm not a huge cloud person. The whole point is that we're self-hosting things, but you may want to be backing this up to something in the cloud just as a third, fourth, fifth type of backup to make sure you don't lose your data. SSH connection, so by default you cannot SSH to the machine, so you may want to set up an SSH connection if you want to do that, to SSH over and do something in the hardware. But I'll show you that they have a nice built-in console and a built-in shell into the web UI that makes it very easy to use, so you don't really need to have the SSH set up, in my personal opinion, but it depends on if you're going to be on a machine that will give you access to the web browser. You can set up your SSH key pairs for your SSH connections as well. Updating the system, so it can go out and check to see is there an update available. It'll tell you if there is or if there isn't, and if there is, then it will try to install the update for you. Now, updating is always a little bit risky. Even if it says it's a stable update, you should always make sure you have a good backup of your system before you do an update, just to make sure you don't lose anything. It's always a thing where you should be very cautious with that. There is support options if you need support. Now, if you're not paying for TrueNAS, you may have to wait for a while to get any kind of support. It might be better to go out to some forums, Reddit, things like that, and see what you can find out. And then if you do want two-factor authentication, you can go and set up two-factor authentication in the system as well, which is always a good idea from a security standpoint. So it's not easy for somebody to get your username and password and go use that to log into your data system. And they would still need that second factor, which makes it much more difficult to access that system. So you can check out your network summary, check out your global configuration information for the network information. You can look at your interfaces. So in this case, I only have one interface. It's a wired interface. I'm not going to set up any other interfaces, but you can have multiple interfaces if you want to. And then you can set up static routes, things like that as well in here. It's nothing that I'm going to set up right now, but we may do this later in another part of the series. Storage, this is the one where people really want to know, okay, what's the first thing I do to get set up? Because you can install this thing, you can get everything set up, but storage is kind of the big part of TrueNAS. It's a NAS, network attached storage. So when you get into pools, you can click on add. Once you see this, you're going to see that there's kind of a wizard that it's going to go through. So you want to create a new pool. Now if you have an existing pool, like you already have a ZFS pool somewhere and you want to import that, you've set up all those drives in TrueNAS and you want to import it, you can click on this option to do that. But we're going to start with a new one. So we're going to say create a new pool, and I'm going to click on this button here. Now TrueNAS goes out and tries to find all of my hard drives that are connected. Now I have one drive that I think must not be a good drive. I've messed with it and messed with it. It doesn't want to connect. It is a USB drive. So this one here is a USB drive, and you can see that indicated that it has just DA. If it says ADA, then this is an internal drive in my case. So I have two internal drives. I've got an 8 terabyte drive and a 2 terabyte drive, and then I've got a 1 terabyte USB drive set up. So I've gone in and said I want to create this pool. Now it's zoomed in so it looks a little bit odd, but I'm going to zoom it back out for just a minute so you can see what's going on. So I'm going to pick the disks that I want to use in a pool, or in what they call a VDEV, which is a virtual device. So I'm saying I want to group these disks together in a certain way to make them act like they might be one disk or behave in a special way that they wouldn't normally do on their own. Now you can pick as many drives as you want for the number of drives you have. If you have a really big box or a big server, you might have 10 drives, 13 drives, just depends on what you're running. But in my case, I've got these 3 drives, so I'm going to set up these 2 drives in a pool for you guys. And I'm going to so I select the drives I want. I'm going to move them over. And then I'm going to go down here right below this section. It's kind of weird to see, but you see down here it says you can't use different drives of different sizes. So I'm going to go up here and I'm going to say I don't want this to be a mirror. I want this to be a stripe. So if you look at the size that it estimates, when I say stripe, it shows almost 3 gigs, or almost 3 terabytes, which is what this is. But if I go back to mirror, you see it says it's only about 1 terabyte, because what it's going to do is it's going to say, I'm going to take the smallest drive you've got and I'm going to fill it up, but then I'm going to mirror that information on this other drive. So if you have 2 1 terabyte drives and you want to store 1 terabyte of data, what that does is it says, okay, we're putting the data here, but we're going to mirror it here. We're going to create a duplicate here. So if this one craps out, you've still got this one. So it's kind of a nice setup to do that, but it does take twice as many drives to do that. Now when you do striping, normally you want to use more than 2 disks. You actually want to use more like 4 disks. But in this case, I'm just kind of showing you could do the same thing, pick 4 drives, and then tell it you want to do a stripe. And it will come up and say, hey, you've got this much space when you do that. And that's where you have that opportunity to say, I want to set this up in a certain type of RAID array so that I can pull a disk and put another one in and it will repair itself. So you can see here that it's warning me, hey, you shouldn't use 2 different size drives. That's okay. I'm going to tell it I want to do that, and I'm going to tell it to force, and then it's going to warn me again. I'm going to say confirm, and then I'm just going to click on the button. Now I need to give this a name, so I'm going to call this 3TB underscore pool. So I'm just giving this thing a name, and then you see the button creates. It warns me all of the data from these drives is about to be wiped out because we're going to create this pool. So I have to say, yep, I mean to do this, and then I'm just going to say go. So it's going to start creating the pool, and again, depending on what you're creating and how it works, it could take a little time, so we're just going to let this run, and then I'll come back when it's done. Okay, I just got a warning that says the name has to begin with a letter, so it failed. I don't know why that's a rule, but okay, we'll say 3TB. How about that? I'll spell it out, and again, we'll hit go, and I'll confirm, and we'll let it run. And it went pretty fast that time. It got them all set up, and now I've got a pool, and I've got a disk basically that's my storage pool disk here. And it's called 3TB. It's got a file system, and it shows that it's got used 500 something kilobytes, and then I've got nearly 3 terabytes of space on it. Now I'm going to go back, and I'm going to say pools again, and I'm going to do add, and I'm going to do create pool, and you see now I've just got the 8 terabyte drive. I'm going to move it over on its own. And it's going to be a stripe because it's only 1 drive anyways, and I'm just going to call this 8, or I can't do it, 8TB, and I'm going to hit create, confirm it, and create the pool. And now you can see I've got 2 different pools, and I've got one that's a single drive and one that's made out of 2 drives. Now inside of these pools we can do several things as well. So I've got a pool, I could just start using this, but I actually want to create some storage space. So I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to say add dataset. I'm going to give this dataset a name, and I'm going to call this iMac backup, and this is going to be for my wife's iMac. So I can put under the comments so there's a few settings here that say sync, inherit, and you can click on that to see what other options there are. I'm just going to leave it on inherit for now. LZ4, yeah, I'm okay with most of these options. There's nothing here that I really want to change. And then finally, it's got another one there for inherit. I'm going to blow this back up for you guys a little bit. So there's encryption options as well if you want to encrypt the data while it's sitting. But right now we're going to say non-encrypted. I'm okay with that. It's nothing that I feel like I need to encrypt. And then ZFS is off. Now you can turn on ZFS if you want to. So I'm going to do that. So it's called ZFS deduplication. And it tells you the feature is memory intensive and permanently affects how the data is stored. So it says it's recommended, it's got a recommendation here for it, so we can turn it back off. That's okay. We'll just inherit. That's fine. Case sensitivity is sensitive. I believe iMacs are sensitive to case, so that's okay. And Share type is generic, and here you can choose generic or SMB. So I'm going to choose generic. I'm going to click on advanced options to see what else they have here. So quota for this data set, I'm going to say 2, or actually 1.5 TB. Does that work? TB, yeah, I think that'll work. We can click on the little question mark to see. So this is setting the maximum allowed space for this actual data share. So again, it says you're going to get a quota warning alert at 80%. You can change that to be 90%. You can change that to be 12%, whatever you want. But right here, you just have to uncheck it if you want to change that number. You can reserve space for the data set. I don't think I need to do that in this case. I'm going to close this help bubble. So there's a quota for the data set and all of its children if you want to set that as well, but we don't need to do that right now, I don't think. So then you have the encryption options, and there's other options. So ZFS is off. You can do inherit. Again, it's all set to inherit right now. I'm okay with all of this. Again, SMB is the only other option we have, and I want to leave that as generic. So I'm just going to say submit. So it goes out and it's going to create that data set, and there it is right there. So here's our data set, which is great. We've now got this iMac backup share. Now I need to set this to a user, so I need to go back up to my users because this is going to be my wife's user. And I'm going to create a user, and I'm going to add a new user, and I'm going to put in her name and her username. Now her last name is not Lopez anymore, but it was. So, and an email, which is, and a password. She's going to need a strong password. Oh, whoops, I'm typing and not doing anything. There we go. Get a strong password set up, and then it gives her a user ID or group ID. Primary group. I don't think I have any groups set up, so it's not going to let me choose any groups. Maybe it did. No. And then auxiliary groups. So there's all kinds of auxiliary groups, but don't need to put that. We're going to pick where her home directory would be. She needs an SSH public key. You can add that as well. I'm not going to in this case. If you want to permit sudo for a user, you can. If you want to lock a user, you can. If it's a Microsoft account, you can check this box. In this case, it's an iMac. It is not a Microsoft account, but this can make things much easier for you if you're using a Windows machine and backing up to TrueNAS, especially if you use the same credentials that you log into your Windows machine with. On TrueNAS, when you set up a Samba share, when you do that, you can just mount that thing onto your Windows machine and you don't have to put in the credentials. But if you make them different, it'll just prompt you for the credentials, and then you can save those when you do that. We're going to leave the permissions the same as what they've got here, and we're going to say submit. So now I've got a user. I'm going to go back to my storage, go back to my pools. So now that we've got our data sets, we're going to go down here and we're just going to find that little 3-dot button again. We're going to click on edit permissions for the data set. And we're going to go here to owner, and you see it says root. So I want to change that to all the way down here to Lopez. And again, for the group, I want to do the same thing so that she is the owner and the group. The permissions here look okay. I'm just going to leave them alone, but you can change them if you want to. You can say apply permissions recursively. It's fine. I don't have any data in there yet. If you have data, that could mess up some data that you may already have existing, but in this case I don't have any data in there yet, so we're just going to click that button, and then we're going to click on save. So now she's the owner of this, and I can go in and set up that user to start backing up to that space with her iMac. This is the way that you set up pools, and this is the way that you kind of handle that data. Now I've only used 1.5 terabytes out of almost a little over 2.5 terabytes. So that means I still have a terabyte left in this system. So I can go out and I can actually create another data set. And I can call this Mac Mini, and I can say this is mom's backup. And again, I'm going to leave inherit all good. I'm just going to hit go. And then I'm going to go back over to accounts real quick. I'm going to create an account for mom. Now I have an account created for my mom. And I can go back to my storage. And I can go back to my pools. And I can come down here to Mac Mini. And again, I can click on edit permissions. Change this from root to this one for my mom, and the same thing on the group. And we can leave the permissions alone. You can again adjust those permissions if you want to, and then hit save. So now I've got a pool set up. I've got 2 data sets set up on that pool, and those can be backups for 2 different machines, or they can be groups. I could have set this to groups that more people had access than one, and set up spaces for them to save documents, those kind of things too as well. I think that's going to cover it for this part of the series. On the next part, I'm going to go through actually using the plugin system and using some data sets to do some plugins and add some plugins. So they have some really cool plugins in here. So you have to choose a pool for plugin and jail storage. I'm not going to do that yet, but we will get there. And here you can see that they have the IX Systems plugins. So if you're interested in any of these things, there's Nextcloud, here's Plex, here's the beta version of the media server, there's SyncThing. There's quite a few things that IX Systems makes as far as the different options that you have for plugins. But then if you click this little down arrow, you can pick on the community plugins. And here you really start to see how many plugins are out there. So the community plugins are numerous, and if you are looking to install any of these things, this is a really great way to do it because it kind of does all of the install work for you. There may be a little bit of setup that you do with it, but really it takes all of the hard part out of getting some of these things set up. And if you're running something like TrueNAS, hopefully you're running on a machine that can really deal with it, and you've got some space and some RAM and things like that to do a lot of these things that you might want to do. So we'll get into the plugins and how to deal with that stuff next time. If you like this video, like, subscribe, tell your friends about it so they can come along on the journey with us, and I'll talk to you next time.